Okay, hi everyone. Like I said, I was gonna just record a brief video. Hopefully this won't take too long or too much of your time. Just in lieu of having a TA meeting this week because it's a holiday. However, I did want to give you guys just a quick little um check-in to make sure that you have all of the information that you need for this week. So let me share my screen with you. In the Google Drive, we have the TA meeting. So here's the TA agenda for Practice Makes Perfect. I kind of outlined stuff in a little bit more detail than I normally would in the agenda, so that way you have this as a reference to look back on. So a couple of things just for this week, essentials. Make sure that the students have completed the lab safety quiz and the lab safety agreement or the lab safety contract. Those are all uploaded in Canvas. The lab safety quiz is auto graded, and the lab safety agreement is basically a completion. You just need to make sure that they actually signed it. Um, if they haven't done this, they are allowed to stay for your pre-lab lecture. But then after that, they need to step out of the lab and then come back or to complete those and then come back once it's done. Um, Hopefully everyone has it done ahead of time, but again, make sure that you check that and that they have it done before. Especially this week because we're actually starting to do a little bit of science. It's not super crazy science, but we are doing experiments, so they need to have the lab safety done ahead of time. This week we're really starting to enforce goggles and PPE and lab notebooks. So for the goggles, they need to have them PPE, right? Making sure that they have the closed-toed shoes, long pants, most of their skin is covered, and their notebooks. Something that Joe and I discussed, we now have a bin of loaner goggles in the lab. And so rather than kind of having to go through this struggle of do they have them, do they not have them, if they are off campus, but they were prepared for the lab and they don't have their goggles, what are they going to do? They are allowed to borrow. So the lab, the loaner goggles are in, sorry, the loaner goggles are in the lab prof area. And so what students can do is they can borrow a pair of goggles, but they need to give the lab prof their student ID or something, so cell phone, whatever, as collateral to make sure that we get the loaner goggles back. If not, I feel like students are just going to keep taking them, right, every week that they forget, and then they forget those. The other thing is that if a student borrows goggles, they automatically lose 2 points off of their notebook pages. So it's kind of an incentive to make sure that they're still bringing their own goggles, but also not a complete penalty where they're not allowed to complete the lab. Um, so just make a note that if they are borrowing goggles, that they lose those 2 points off of the notebook pages. As I have this note here, I think it's still better than not being able to do the lab at all, because then that becomes a zero or their dropped lab. So minus 2 points. This week, carbonless copy notebooks are essential because of the activity that we're doing. It's the practice makes perfect where they tear out that copy. They need to, to have that done or they need to have the carbonless copy notebooks for this week. If they don't have a carbonless copy, again, minus 2 points, but then they're still able to do the lab. I'm going to check with the other lab profs to kind of see. I did have a student last week ask kind of why do we require them now that everything is so digital and electronic. I'm going to double check and see if we are going to continue to require this. So stand by on that. If you have students that don't have the carbonless copy, take the points off this week, but I will try and find out kind of what our policy will be moving forward in regards to them using electronic versions. If students have accommodations to use electronic notebooks, then obviously don't take the 2 points off. But I'm talking about students that are just using a regular notebook that doesn't have the copies. Um, Remind them that every week they should be checking for a pre-lab quiz. They should be doing their lab notebook pages, and then there's some or a post-lab worksheet. So those will be every single week. Like I said, I'm trying to make it super consistent so that way there isn't a lot of confusion. This week they don't receive the procedure ahead of time, so they may come in and be like, "Oh, I wasn't able to do my procedure ahead of time." Yes, I know. So for the lab notebook pages for this week, it'll just be 10 points for the final submission. It won't be the 5 points for having the procedure done and 5 points for the submission at the end. We'll just do 10 points total at the end. With that, because they don't receive the procedure ahead of time, um, you will be getting paper copies of the procedure that you hand out to the first round of experiments. Um, Make sure that you get all of them back. So there should be 4 copies per, 4 copies per station per section. Okay, so you need to have then, it would be what, 12 copies back. Yes. Okay. Sorry, I had to do a little bit of math there. 12 copies back. So you'll have 4 copies for station one, 4 copies for station two, 4 copies for station three. Make sure that when you collect at the end, you end up with the 12 pieces of paper, so 4 from each station, and return those to the lab prof so they don't get lost. We just don't want this to get leaked to other students so that way they still don't know what to expect. Okay. So make sure that we return that to the lab prof at the end. Um, so this week the experiment is practice makes perfect. Kind of an overview. You have 3 different stations that students are going to rotate through. The main goal of this lab is to teach good lab notebook technique. So writing a good lab notebook, writing a good procedure, making the observations. The experiment itself doesn't necessarily matter. So because of that, the exact measurements are essentially irrelevant. So tell the students not to stress about that. Sometimes they get really hung up on like it needs to be exactly 50 milliliters. Like, no, it's approximate. Um, so that doesn't necessarily matter. It's all about the lab notebook. So the way that this works, just for if any of you haven't done this or just as a reminder, because it's been a while, is we do 3 rounds. And so students are split into the 3 different stations into groups of 2 or 3, depending on the number of students you have in your section. So some students will start at station 1, some at station 2, some at station 3. The students at that station will receive the paper copy of the procedure, all right, with it written out. What they're expected to do is transcribe and perfect that procedure in their lab notebook, and then complete the experiment with notes, observations, and suggestions. Okay. That's what they do at station one. Then, once they're done with station one, they rip out those copies, leave it at the station. You collect the official procedures, and they rotate on to the next station. So then the next station, those students are using the procedures, right, the carbon copies that the last group of students created. So the next station, they're not allowed to see the original procedure. They have to base it off of what the last group of students was able to come up with. I like to not tell the students that this is what they're doing. And so just you kind of give them the official procedure, let them go and see what happens. And then by the time they get to the 3rd round, they'll understand that that's the goal of the activity. Um, you can tell them if you want, but I kind of the point is to I don't know, I guess make them struggle a little bit. So then for round 2, right, the students will leave the carbonless copy of their procedure at the station and move to station 2 complete, right? This is where I said the TAs will remove those. And then the students need to rely on the last group's procedures to make that station. And then we'll do that one more time for that 3rd round and the 3rd station. Couple of things, make sure that you have the students dispose of their waste appropriately. This week they'll have to submit their notebook pages as digital copies. Again, usually most weeks it's kind of up to you as to how you want them to submit the notebook pages, whether the physical copies or upload. This week they'll just have to do the digital copy because they've left their carbon copies at other stations. Um, and then there is still a post-lab worksheet associated with this that they need to complete in Canvas. So a couple of just helpful hints as you're going through this. Tell the students that, right, they're focusing on the procedure, right? It's all about paying attention to the specifics, enhancing the procedure, making it their own, making it better. The procedures that we have typed out for the students are very, very minimal, and that's intentional. So it's to try and make it better so that way the students really know what they're doing. It's not about the chemistry, right? Nothing needs to be exact, and then come up with how you would communicate this to someone. One thing to keep in mind as well is try and keep it to about 30 to 40 minutes per station. You want to keep the students moving and on pace. If you kind of let them go, some of them will try and take an hour per station. We're not doing anything fancy enough to take an hour per station. So I would say even set a timer, give them 30 minutes, and then you can give a 5 minute kind of warning or, an extra t 5 to 10 minute buffer, but no longer than 40 minutes per station. So that way they move on to the next one. Um, so at each of the stations, and know Joe went over this last week, but that was like a whole lifetime ago. So part one is non-Newtonian fluids and polymers. Station two is chromatography, and station three is like dissolves like. So for station one, they're making oobleck, which is just cornstarch and water, and they're making silly putty. Station two, they're doing paper chromatography, so using coffee filters and markers to separate out the colors in the marker. And then station three is they're doing basically like alcohol and water versus alcohol and oil, so that like dissolves like. For the waste disposal, for station one, there is a waste bucket in the hood. So make sure that they're disposing of the oobleck, so the cornstarch slurry, in the hood. They don't need to be using a funnel or graduated cylinder for any of this, especially for the silly putty part. So actually I'll move that over. Um, all amounts are approximate, so just kind of eyeball it. At the end, you as the TAs are supposed to put the cornstarch slurry down the drain, okay? We don't want the students to do that just because we want them to get in the habit of understanding how to dispose of waste correctly. So, it's your job though to dispose of that waste at the end. The silly putty, they can either throw it in the trash, just the regular trash can, or take it with them. One big thing with that is they want to use the pipettes and use graduated cylinders to measure the glue. Just use it straight out of the glue container. Okay, so a couple of squirts or squeezes of the glue is close enough to one pipette full. Again, it does not have to be exact. Please do not let them put glue in the graduated cylinders, okay? Or into a volumetric pipette, or anything like that. So, um, the big thing with that is make sure that they don't put the silly putty in the waste container that's in the hood. The waste container is only for the oobleck, not for the silly putty. Chromatography, all right, the filter paper goes in the trash. That's their stationary phase. And then the mobile phase is just DI water. So this one they can dump down the drain because it's very clearly just water. Make sure that the beakers get washed. And then station three, like dissolves like, so the test tubes can go into the broken glass container. So the test tubes that we use are disposable. We don't need to worry about washing those. Um, the pipettes that they're using, make sure that they're using the plastic pipettes and not volumetric pipettes. This can go just in the regular trash. No oil and alcohol down the sink. So, Joe and his team have placed a bucket on that station that has a waste container in it with a funnel. Make sure they're putting all of the waste in that. We don't want to mix it with the oobleck waste, and we don't want it to go down the drain. So put it in there. And then for that waste, you guys don't need to worry about anything. Joe and his team will take care of it. Um, Big thing with this is no oil in the graduated cylinder. Okay, so again, they can just eyeball it, use the pipette to measure the oil, the disposable pipette to measure the oil. But getting oil in the graduated cylinder, it just, right, it really adheres to that glass. Um, and they're difficult to clean. So try and make sure that they don't do that. Okay, so that's kind of it. For cleanup, like I said, focus more on keeping them on pace and on the procedure. So hopefully the science isn't too difficult. The other activity that they'll have for this week that I've moved up, so last semester, and it was just me not knowing exactly what it was. Last semester, I don't think we did this until week 3. Um, so we're moving it to week 2. This week is the lab notebook critique activity. And so if you go into well, it's in Canvas, but it's also in the Google Drive. They have a lab notebook critique worksheet, which looks like this. All right, so they list out 10 things that were done well, and then 10 things that were done poorly with an annotation as to why it's important. These are just completion, okay? So they need to have the 10 items with the 10 explanations. They need to have the 10 mistakes with the 10 explanations. Um, if they're missing lines or if they're missing explanations, that's where you deduct points. I believe it's, yeah, so it says, right, you need all 10 of both for to receive the full points. I believe this is worth 20 points, which means each box is worth half a point. So don't stress too much about grading these in regards to like, did they have like a beautiful explanation? Like, no, as long as they have something written down that's reasonable, it's totally fine. The other thing with this lab notebook critique, and these are posted on Canvas, is that I provided sample lab notebook pages that I want them to critique. Okay. So these are the, oops, not that. These are the notebook pages that I want them to critique, not their own. That was a point of confusion last semester. Some students were just kind of making stuff up or using their own lab notebook pages. But no, I have notebook pages. And if you can see, right, like some of these things, so this would be well done, right? They used one line to cross out the volume final and rewrote it. Maybe this isn't super great. Like I can't read that. What does that even say? It's a question mark. It needs something, something tomorrow. All right. This would be a negative here where they scratched it out completely. We're supposed to just draw one line through it. This would be a negative. They clearly used pencil right here and tried to erase it. So, um, anyway, make sure that they're using those notebook pages. So maybe even pull those up in Canvas, during lab, so that way you can show them. So, um, that's my note there. After this exercise, they need to have those lab notebook pages done correctly at the beginning of lab to receive points. So after this week, they now know how to do it, right? They've seen it. They need to have it done ahead of time. So moving forward, so basically starting next week, you need to start deducting those 5 points if they don't have the purpose done or the procedure done ahead of time. Couple of last minute things. So I want to make sure that you're just grading your section, keep up with stuff. I don't need their attendance, but I do want you to keep track of it, and I will ask for it at the end of the semester. I just don't need extra emails from all of you every single week telling me who was missing. So as long as you're keeping track of it, make sure or that's fine with me. I don't need to see it every week. The other thing with the grading is several of you have independent study students. Make sure that you're not forgetting about theirs. So when you filter Canvas by your section, it will show everyone registered for your section, but not the independent study. You need to search by for their name individually. So just an extra note for those of you that have independent study students. Reminder, I will post the grades or release grades, so um don't you release them. I'll go ahead and do that. And then next week, we were supposed to do it this week, but next week we'll do this grade norming activity. So um I'm trying to think. I think that's mainly it for this week. We will have our regular scheduled TA meeting next week, so I just kind of be prepared for that and be ready to come in. If you have any questions or concerns, if there was something that I missed, I know this was pretty short and fast, but at the same time, we weren't there to kind of like answer, or we weren't in person to answer questions. So if you have any questions, please, please, please email me. I'm happy to help. But if not, I think that's it. Hopefully you actually watch this all the way to end, but I'll be around this week, and I'm always available via email or via text, so please don't hesitate to reach out. All right, thanks, guys.